So, um, so we're gonna go through Jonah, but it's gonna be more than Jonah. Okay. Jonah's a very short book. You guys probably know, at least remember the basics of Jonah and everything. And we are gonna eventually go through the book like verse by verse and everything. But Jonah is way more than like what people see on the surface. Um, Usually they know the story and then they know that Jesus said something about, the sign of Jonah and so Jesus uses the story of Jonah as an allegory, basically, or as a sign or a type of his own death and resurrection, right? So you know that like just reading Jonah, you're like, okay, people might get into this like discussion. Is it a historical story or is it a like some kind of a parable or whatever? It's kind of like
Yes.
yes, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's like all these stories, they have so many layers to them. Exactly. I was reading actually in Blue Letter Bible, some commentary on Jonah sort of thing. And somebody was saying, like there are three ways to interpret Jonah. One is to, as a myth, just like Robinson Crusoe, blah blah blah. And the second way is like as an allegory that it's only talking about like Jonah is Israel and he's been swallowed up by the Assyrian like ba the Babylonian Empire was going to be swallowed up by Israel and then spit back out in after their exile and stuff like that. And I was going, you know what? Actually, all of that's true. And then he goes, but there's only one way to interpret Jonah, and that's historically. But I'm going, why? ¿Por qué no los dos? Right? Like why not both? Why not? It's like what's going on? Why do you have to? And what's funny is that this author was also talking about like like the typology a little bit in Jonah. I was like, yeah, if you're going to say it's only an allegory, then yeah, I got to agree. But it's not like you got to say there's only one way to look at it. So we're actually going to look at the story a number of different ways, and it's one of those things that once you start talking about like this aspect of Jonah, and then you have to kind of go back and explain that concept, right? So today we're going to go into the chaos waters. So we're going to go all the way back to Genesis 1 for a theme. And then because it kind of lays a little bit of the groundwork of what we're going to do in the future with this. Now we're also going to look at the book at the level of like what it means to our lives and the problems that we have with God and with each other and people that we don't like, etc. So we are going to look at it on a personal level. There's also stories, that are connected. Say in the New Testament, what about when Jesus was asleep in the boat and then he stills the waters? What about It's like, what about like when he pulls Peter, who he's called Bar Jonah, son of Jonah, out of the water, and those sorts of things. So those images are all or snapshots are all connected to each other. These stories talk to each other, and so because there's so many layers in Jonah that you can talk about, some of them I'm sure you've never even heard of or considered. Um, this is a good excuse to kind of go back and explore a short book on multiple different levels. So uh, so I don't know how long it's going to take, but we'll just kind of pick at it once at a time, one bit at a time. But we're going to start off with like Chaos Waters. So yeah, it's a book of multi-layered types and allegories and stuff like that. I'll call it allegories. Paul uses the word allegory, and he actually talks one time about like how Isaac is the son of the spirit, while Ishmael was the son of the flesh. And he talks about the free woman and the slave woman and the freed woman, and how we're children of the freed woman and everything. And he says this is an allegory, and because he's seeing something in that story that's bigger than the historical events themselves, right? So yeah, so here I kind of chose this picture because we always hear about Jonah and the great fish, or we hear about Jonah and the whale or something. Actually, I don't even like the term whale, because that's more like several hundred years old, that where you've even you said, oh, it must be a whale. I kind of like, who cares what it is? In the Hebrew, it says fish. In the Greek, it has a term that can be used for any great sea monster. And Jesus, when he refers to the Jonah story, refers to it as a word that was used in Greek mythology to describe sea monsters and stuff. So for early Christians, they thought of it as Leviathan, um, even if they saw it as a fish. And again, it's kind of like, well, was it a fish or was it a dragon? It's like, and the answer is actually yes, because they're seeing it on several different levels. And it's kind of like, on one level, it's a fish, but the fish part is important, okay? Because there's something that's being done in the story where Leviathan is being turned into a fish or tamed down. It's weird. In the first part of the story, the fish is referred to in the masculine. The second part, it's referred to in the feminine. So it appears that now that fish has become like a womb and is giving birth in a way to Jonah. So there's like a million things going on in the story. And even in the story itself, it's inconsistent on purpose, right? It's telling you different things that it can tell within that story. So there's things of obviously that come before the book of Jonah, and then there's things that come after the book of Jonah, and we're going to see how like some of those things connect to each other, and that how Jonah is going to connect to stories kind of going forward. So we're going to go all the way back into this idea of biblical cosmology, because especially when we get to Jonah 2, some of this is going to make a lot more sense once you've kind of digested a little bit of the way that the Hebrew cosmology is envisioned. Um, it's not the same kind of thing that we would look at cosmology and say, like, well, we have the earth here and the sun here and the planets there, and it's all about physical science, and we look at the whole cosmology as a materialist, right? it I kind of think in the ancient world they sort of saw it that way, but at the same time they were seeing it in with spiritual eyes too. So for example, we've talked like a lot about mountains, right? And gods being on mountains. Everybody knew if you walked up to the top of that mountain, even though you had all your mythology or something about like the mountain and the gods being up there, if you walked to the top of the mountain, you wouldn't see any gods, right? Having a council meeting in tents or anything like that. They it's not as cut and dry as we would like to describe cosmology. But this is kind of the biblical cosmology. This is a 2D kind of representation. It's very simple. You have the earth here. If you looked at it from the top, it would be round, or it would be like a disc of the earth, right? You have the waters below, which out here you have the seas, and underneath you have like the waters below, which feed springs up above. The water above is the they call it the rakia, or it's the firmament, and then you have heaven in between, or the skies, right? You actually have the stars affixed to this dome. Uh, so it's underneath the waters above. And then way up on top, you have the heaven of heavens, which is like God's realm. Um, and it's actually not that dissimilar from a whole bunch of other cultures in that time. Even if you look at Mayan culture, or things across the world, or things in Asia, you're like, it's not it's something people would have recognized. And so kind of my point of view is that the Bible is speaking to an ancient culture in a way that they can understand. They are writing poetry and reflecting on things kind of based off of that, but their theology is way different than anybody else's. Here's another way to look. Here's another diagram of that. This the one that I'm here. You see God in the heaven of heavens, and you have the earth below, the great deep. I pulled this one up because right here you have Rahab, which is the name of a dragon, right? And Leviathan, which is kind of the same thing. But you have the idea of Leviathan being out in the oceans, or you have the idea of Leviathan being in the great deep underneath here. So we're the way that Jonah is going to talk about the great deep, he's going to say, I was at the roots of the mountains, I was in Sheol, and all this kind of stuff. And it's unclear sometimes whether he's talking about the great deep as underneath here, or if he's talking about the seas as over here. I think he's kind of talking about both things.
Do you know what years those were drawn?
This one looks like a Larkin one, so that looks like 1930s maybe or something.
Earth is looking pretty flat over there.
No, all of these are flat. This is just biblical cosmology. It's flat and it's like a disc. So it's not like we try to make something, it's the circle of the earth. Actually this one looks a bit newer, but it's like the idea of the circle of the earth. Kind of like if you stood on the top of a mountain and you saw like the whole horizon all around you. It's a little bit like what you would envision. But here, I like this because you've got like this dragon figure here at the foundation, underneath the foundations of the earth. You see the dragon. Some of this cosmology you get from Genesis, some of this cosmology you get from Job, and from the Psalms. It's almost always in poetry, but it's often referred to this way. So here, come on in. So here you get this idea uh, of like the temple in the heavens and the temple on the earth, and so if you remember, were you guys here for like the we can see you, Robert. So how
You said that I said civilized.
so who was with me for the Hebrews? Were you here for a Hebrews Bible study?
A year and a half ago, right?
Yeah. Okay. So remember, like if you go back in Hebrews, he's talking about like well, let me go further than Hebrews. If you remember, like where God showed Moses a pattern up on the mountain on Sinai, and then says basically, make down there, make a tabernacle down there according to the pattern that you saw in the heavens. Okay, so in Hebrews, you have this idea that everything that was done down here in terms of sacrifice, in terms of the temple on the earth, is connected to the temple in heaven. Okay, as it is in heaven, right? So it's like when Moses sees what he's supposed to build in the tabernacle down there, he sees what's up there in God's temple. If we get to Revelation, it has all this mention of the heavenly temple. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about like how the Antichrist was going to seat himself in the temple of God as if he was God, and I said that like you don't need to have a temple in Jerusalem for that to happen. It's like this is a pattern that you saw with the king of Tyre, the king of Babylon, that they thought of themselves as sitting in the heavenly council among with the gods, or that they were above everybody else, and that they had called themselves basically a god or God himself, or a God by title, like God by title. Say, I'm God, without knowing.
One of the gods.
Well, yeah, they don't know who Yahweh is, so that's not what they're talking about. It's like saying back then it was like if some tyrant calling himself "I'm God" just meant like I'm king. There are other kings, but they just thought of themselves as sitting in a temple. And so this isn't just Hebrew cosmology. This is like a cosmology that's in like Babylonian paganism and Egyptian cosmology has that sort of thing. So this is kind of like so when you're going to find a part in Jonah here where he says, I will still see your temple. He's probably not talking about the temple in Jerusalem. He's saying, yet will I see your temple. As a prophet, he's probably had experiences where he's been in the heavenly council, had visions in the temple of God, because the qualifier for a prophet in the Old Testament was that you were part of the divine council. You don't become called, you are sent out from the heavenly council to go say something to the people, which means that you were in the presence of God, you were in the heavenly courts. It's like, who will go for us? I'll go, send me, right? That's always the scene, right? Even John is like, yeah, this Jesus here, he's the one that was shown to me. Shown to me in what context? He's in the heavenly council. He's going out there and he's like, I've seen this before. He could have been shown by an angel. He could have been shown by God. He could have been shown by Elijah, because Elijah, he came in the ministry of Elijah or something like that, right? So there's a lot to say about that. But again, in this diagram, you have the Leviathan chaos over here. This is another one where you see a heavenly temple here. You see the earthly temple here. The waters on the outside called the seas, kind of like the snow globe sort of thing of the firmament. Down here you have like the Leviathan down here. Here he's got 7 heads. So you got the 7-headed dragon. We'll talk about the dragon like next week or the week after that, but we're actually going to talk about the chaos waters. And this, of course, brings us all the way back to Genesis 1:1. We're going to lay down the foundation of chaos waters before we're even going to open up page 1 of Jonah. Okay. So it says the earth was without form and void. Without form and void is the same, tohu wabohu, which is the same thing that's said of the wilderness. Okay. It's like formless, void, empty. It's a realm that people don't belong in, kind of, or you had the sense, I don't belong out here. Things are wild out here. The wild animals, the wilderness animals, the realm of Azazel, if it's the land, it's the realm of Leviathan, if it's the sea.
Azazel the one where it said send the goat out?
Send the goat out to Azazel, right? You go out of the camp. Camp is a safe place. Out there is the waste and wild, where the lions devour, and you have the serpent comes from. The serpent is actually a wilderness animal. So what's the serpent doing in the garden? It's a wilderness animal. So, but you have this idea of the primeval sea that God rules over the chaos waters. So it's not just that it's death, it's also, in a sense, potential. Okay. That's important because what's going to happen with these chaos waters is that out of chaos, God is going to form something and builds life from, but he's also going to let it collapse in itself during the flood. And when you go all the way to Christ, you have this idea of baptism, where out of the chaos waters comes new life. Okay, that's kind of like where we're going with this. So you have this idea here that's God, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Later on you can kind of signify it by a dove. You really don't see that until Christ, but you also see it you have a hint of it in the Noah story, right? He sends out a dove to go discover new life. It's like you have the Holy Spirit hovering, which is a sign that, like, God is brooding over the waters, the way like a hen, or like some kind of a female bird would brood over something to preserve life, or that life is going, eggs are going to hatch or something is going to come out of it. In the Noah story, it identifies where the land is, where new life is going to come from. Of course, in the Jesus's baptism, he's going to land on Christ himself, identifying the new land, the new life. the new life going forward. So it says here, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So you got waters above, waters below, and God made the expanse and separate the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so, and God called the expanse heaven. Okay. Now it means the sky, or it can mean the heavens, or it's I would say the lower heaven. Okay, so here's kind of like an old painting, kind of conceptual painting, where you have like the stars underneath the firmament, but above the firmament you have the waters above, the waters below. I think the waters above could be something like the sea of glass that you see in Revelation. It's the platform, and God that God is above, right? So I think that you have this signified by a blue curtain when you go into the Holy of Holies. There's all these. The the tabernacle is a horizontal representation of the vertical of what he actually saw. So you always have these, above the cherubim. He's above the cherubim, above the sea of glass. It's like a platform. And some people think that that's kind of related to what the firmament above is. And another part in Genesis 1 says, and God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered he called seas. So a big way to that you have, so if you have chaos waters, this is an old concept, right? If you have chaos, but you're going to create order out of the chaos, you have to separate. Right. You have to say, this is kind of like when you order your desk, right? You got to separate everything, sort everything, say this is for this, this is for this, this is for this, right? So it's kind of like like the land goes over here, the waters below go over here, the waters above go over here. But what if it becomes a big mess again, right? That's what happens in the flood, is that the waters above and the waters below collapse, and then you have chaos again, at least to a limited degree. So here's where I told you that I was going to take a lot from the Bible Project. So through the chaos waters into new life. So you have in this first little picture here that before Noah's time, things had gotten so bad, and what people were doing is evil all the time. You had the waters above and the waters below collapse into each other. You have you have the unseparating of a lot of things, but you have a remnant that's saved out of it and through it all. And in a way, it's a death, but you have the salvation through the chaos waters onto new land. And the word here is Yavashah. It's the same word when God separated the land from the waters in Genesis 1, right? And it's going to be the same word that happens when Moses crosses over the Red Sea on dry land. It's that Yavashah, right? So there's so now the theme is going to develop that you have through waters a remnant is saved, just like Noah in an evil context, an evil empire. They're saved through it like they were like on the ark or something like that, only they remain on dry land, which is that dry land that the ark rests on, which is there at the beginning. And then you have like the salvation at the end of it, and of course you have Moses, who's the figure that leads them through the chaos waters.
And the Egyptians are the ones, I think, and Noah and David all died. They all died. All those animals, everything died.
Yeah, they all died in the waters.
From Noah's time, water from the ground.
Yeah.
That's the water separated from the ground.
Right.
Until the flood came, and they all came back together, and everything else died except the remnant saved.
Right. So in Noah, you have the waters above and below.
It always came from the flood.
Right, but so now you have, okay, so you got the separation of the waters this way,
Yeah.
up and down in the Noah story that collapsed.
Right.
And now you have it like side to side and it collapses.
So the Egyptians got it and they closed.
Yeah, yeah,
Everything else died.
yep, yep,
And it's the same thing, the ribbon and the ribbon.
right. Now you have the same kind of story repeating when they finally get to the promised land with Joshua. They go over on dry land, but now they are in the promised land. They're not just in the land of testing, but he brings them, and Yeshua, it's the same name as Jesus, right? So he is the one who leads them into the promised land itself. So the Jordan becomes the kind of like this symbol of entering into the promised land, being
Like the Dead Sea.
yeah, but
And they didn't get to go in either. Those that walked around and said, Moses, you're not going in here and see the truck rock.
right,
And them that walk around that complaining about the leaks and all that stuff, you're not going in.
you're not going to go in there either.
Those
Yeah,
women, Joshua went in, and those did.
yeah. So it says here in First Peter 3:20, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. It says baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you. So Peter is seeing baptism as that passing through the chaos waters of death onto dry land and into the promised land. Okay. First Corinthians, Paul says something similar, says, for I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. That is the Sea of Reeds, right? And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So baptism in the Jordan, in the New Testament, it signifies entering into the promised land and new life. In the Old Testament, it does too.
We go down
Into the
death of
water.
Christ and back into the news of life.
Yeah,
Same thing, the symbol of Moses typecast of Christ, same thing.
right. Yep. So here, Isaiah, I think, starts this, but it gets repeated in the prophets, where he starts seeing the nations as the chaos waters. So he's looking at like the way that they are being brought into exile into Assyria, into Babylon, kind of the same way that they were in Egypt, that God brings them out, and that the leader is we need a leader that is going to guide Israel back into her promised land, and we find salvation through that. So to give you like a bit of a sampling, Isaiah would say, woe to the many nations that rage. They rage like the raging sea. Woe to the peoples who roar. They roar like the roaring of great waters. Although the peoples roar like the roar of surging waters, when he rebukes them, they flee far away, driven before the wind like chaff on the hills, like tumbleweeds before a gale. And there's
It's like people like seas, multitudes like seas. Revelation talks about the people is represented like the waters.
yeah. I've got something about that in here. Well, so like we'll step through like Daniel. Daniel starts seeing all these empires that come from the seas, right? So they're not exactly Leviathan. They are beasts, though. They are kind of chaos creatures, and they're not kind of like what they're supposed to be. They're hybrid. They're human, but they're subhuman. So it's kind of like the idea that if you are being ruled by sin, it's crouching at your door. It wants to have you, but you must rule over it. That goes all the way into like if you're being ruled by sin, then you are being ruled by something less than human, and you become less than human.
So we always say you're acting like an animal.
You're acting like an animal, right? And so you have these empires that come out of like this chaos waters. But again, you got to remember there's potential in all of this, okay? God had the seas there at the beginning. He's got purposes that he uses it for. It's not so much that the seas or even Leviathan is an enemy of God, so much as it's an enemy of God's creation, and it can do its thing, and God allows it, but he also uses it for his own purposes to work out everything together for good in the end for those who believe in
That's
him.
why I say in terms of simple nature, because Adam, and listen to the serpent,
Mhm.
gave all of that over to the serpent, when we
Right.
to God, and then you go into your simple nature.
Yeah,
The nature is
yeah,
it.
yeah. So Jesus' baptism, he's again there at the Jordan, and I like the way that they have this illustrated because if you look at this picture here in the middle, you see Christ being plunged under the water. Of course, here you have the Holy Spirit identifying new life, right? Um, but it's the same. He's also for prophesying his death and resurrection because it is being plunged into the chaos waters is a death and resurrection event. This is actually the idea that he really connects to in the Jonah story, because when you read Jonah carefully, Jonah writes as if he's died and being resurrected because he's down in Sheol from the belly of the whale, which Christ equates to being in the belly of the great in the belly of the earth, right? And it's the same way that we identify ultimately in baptism to that whole story. So there's a lot of parts to this, but I think you've heard these stories often enough to kind of like see and feel the connections in here. Says here, here's kind of like the and I had a little part of this earlier on, but here's kind of like the a fuller paragraph in First Peter 3. It says, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which we went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah." He's talking about the Nephilim there too. While the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Baptism, which now corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heavens and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. The interesting thing here in Revelation, when you get to the very end, it says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." That's sea, yeah.
I kind of just pictured all like the Eden, like a jungle everywhere.
Well, it kind of, but the whole chaos realm, even though there was potential in it, is no more. Thank God for no more chaos.
Because no more sin, no more death.
No more death,
So all of that is gonna be.
Right. I love the idea of just no more chaos, because like I'm kind of like
All that's gone.
when my dog went off and bit somebody else, that's just chaos and things, you get hurt. It's chaos and all these things that happen, and chaos, you contribute to all this chaos. It's just mess, and God comes and reshapes it, and you make more chaos. It's like I see my life as a lot of like chaos and God fixing things, but yeah, I think chaos is a great way to see this, and it's a good word, and it's a great concept to have, that sea of chaos. When things are too chaotic, you can feel like you're drowning. That you're drowning in all this chaos, and it's just too much, or the tyrants of this world, or like when they gain control and do all these things, like what do? You're floating around in just this mess, right? And so I think they're great visuals, and I don't think we give like the ancient people enough credit for seeing things the way that they saw them. I think we can learn a lot from them. I love this image right here. That's kind of like, I can relate.
Oh, that terrifies me. I love the ocean. And it's the scariest thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just
You talking about the new life, the head and the egg,
Mhm.
Represents life.
Mhm.
Jesus was saying, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who
Mhm.
kills the prophets. Oh, how I longed. Oh, you are like a mother hen does
Yeah,
chicks,
right.
but you were not willing.
Right.
Rescued them from Egypt.
Mhm.
They complain, oh man, we should go back over there, they had onions and leeks.
Yeah.
You're getting manna and angel food from God directly.
Mhm.
You don't even have to gather it no more, no. But you complain about onions, really?
Yeah.
That's why after the 4 years of that 3-week tour, you could have been like Gilligan's Island, a 3-hour tour. You go
Right.
around for 4 years, your clothes don't wear out, and snow don't even burn, and you still complain.
Right.
So since you complain, you got it.
Mhm.
Watch out in the middle of the wilderness to die. Now you're gonna.
Right.
And Moses says you were ignorant. That's what you started once, start twice, you're gonna see it, but you're not going.
Yeah.
And so that's all of us.
And then Jesus accomplished in 40 days what they didn't in
Yeah.
40 years in the wilderness with no food at all.
Why not record it?
You know.
You know.
But 40 is going to come up in this story as well. So here's kind of a teaser and the themes and connections that we're going to explore. Like we went through the chaos waters, and I think maybe we'll get into the first chapter here a little bit because I think we're still running a little early. But we are going to talk about like the chaos dragon, which is a little bit harder to talk about. You kind of have there's in Genesis 1, it's called Tanin, the great sea creatures, is actually the same thing as to call it like a great sea monster, right? What's interesting about it is that where the Tanin or the chaos dragon or the great sea monsters were the the obstacle that the pagan gods had to overcome to create order out of chaos. In Hebrew scriptures,
I'm sorry.
in Hebrew scriptures is not an obstacle for God. He's a part of the creation, you know. So Rahab or Rahav is a seven-headed sea monster. Leviathan's another name. The serpent is an interesting one because it's kind of the so if you look at three realms that man kind of doesn't belong in, besides like the garden and like in an ordered earth, is that one would be, of course, the wild sea, right? You kind of don't belong there. The wilderness, that's where the serpent comes from, came in from the wilderness, but also above, like the where the stars are, the heavenly hosts. And you figure out kind of after a while that serpent is also one of the heavenly hosts.
Yeah, yeah.
And but he is related to the Leviathan, Rahab, and everything. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Chaos Dragon, and we're also going to talk about exile and death. The idea of exile when Israel came back from exile from Babylon, they realized that they were still in exile because they still weren't really free, and they go all the way into the Roman era, and they're still under an oppressor's thumb, right? But then they started, but like by that time, you had a lot of reflection in scripture about, what, humanity's always been in exile. We've been in exile ever since we got kicked out of the garden. And that's why that's why the writer of Hebrews says that when you are God's, you're walking around this earth as a sojourner, as a somebody who kind of doesn't belong here. We do belong on the earth, but not in this context. And so it's like it is home, but it's not. And the way that like uh yeah, so there's a word in German called uh uh there's a word in German that was it no, there's no English word for it. There's no English word for it. I almost said Farvignugan. No, it's Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit means like I've had this explained to me by Germans before. It's a homesickness for a place you've never been before.
There's a Japanese word like that too. And C.S. Lewis talks about that kind of.
Yeah. The C.S. Lewis has this.
That can't be fulfilled on earth.
Yeah, or it's kind of like you see a picture of some place you've never been before and you're homesick for it, but you've never been there. Kind of like that. So exile, you have this thing in the back of your mind all the time, and it shouldn't go away when you're a Christian. This isn't like something that you get saved and wow, all this is resolved and I'm home. You should feel like you are in exile. Paul knows he's in exile, and he tells everybody we're in exile, and we're looking forward in a way to death, because death is on the other side of death is where we're gonna be um, back from exile. So everything that Babylon needs to be destroyed. Babylon as a kingdom hasn't existed forever, but you get to the New Testament, they're still talking about Babylon as if Babylon still needs to be destroyed long after the city's gone, because it's become an archetype, right? For our condition in the world. So we're going to talk about exile and death. We're also going to be talking about disobedient Israel in exile, because Jonah is disobedient Israel in exile, and he's returning from exile, and he's going to fulfill his calling eventually, right? This is the way, we're going to talk about Jesus asleep on the boat.
Yes.
Just like Jonah was. He's the one who stills the waters. So what does that say?
Paul.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Paul on the ship and the shipwrecked, yeah.
Jonah said, "Throw me off the ship."
Right.
You don't have a problem. Jesus still.
We always gotta do stuff the hard way, man. I don't know what.
Yeah. Jesus is walking on the waters, and he's pulling up Peter, who he's called Bar Jonah before, We're going to talk about catching the culprit by casting lots. There's a real tight connection between the Achan story and the story after the destruction of Jericho, and the Jonah story in Jonah 1 that I'd never heard about before until like today or yesterday or something. And then so we'll expand on that. There is a sign given to a wicked generation. A wicked generation is like, and then he says, even Nineveh is going to condemn you guys. But it's the sign of Jonah. And of course, we're going to talk about us and our problems with God and with each other, et cetera, et cetera.
Jesus said he's looking for a generation. He said you're looking for a sign. And now what we're giving you, but none of it's sign Jonah.
Yeah, right.
Man, we haven't even started yet.
We haven't even gotten to verse 1, and I think I'm going to stop right there, because we'll kind of like pick it apart, like verse by verse later. And I kind of feel like we could discuss open up for discussion or whatever at this point. But yeah, so we'll take it's going to be a little bit of it's going to go Jonah, but well beyond Jonah. And so I hope I hope today, just keep in mind, like, think about like the chaos waters, think about those stories. We don't, we don't think much about it. And then when we run into Revelation, it says there was no more sea. Every surfer is bummed, and fisher, but it's kind of like it's in a way, like I said, it's not really what it's talking about. So even I know that like that biblical cosmology can throw some people off, but again, it's not like I don't know if they're thinking about it so much as like the way we would think, we materialists would think of cosmology. But we can share their mindset about a lot of things. I can definitely relate to the idea of chaos and chaos waters, and forces that are outside of my control, and but part of that chaos is what we've been put in on the earth we're here as sub-creators, and sub-creators doesn't mean that you're making stuff out of nothing. It's taking the things and the chaos that's around you, and learning to image God by making something beautiful and useful and good out of those things. And with God's tutoring, in our lives through his Holy Spirit, that's how we do that.
The
You know,
greater things that you shall do.
greater things you
And
do.
speaking those things are not as though they were. And so God is a universe breathing,
Mhm.
speaks things into existence. When he was in the wilderness with the devil, he didn't put hands on him, he didn't find slam and do karate. He said it is written. Spoke the word, used the word. He is the word. So the devil perverts the Christ and Antichrist in you. First thing he asks Adam and Eve is that so? Well, he doesn't want you to do, he wants to know if I can. He don't want you to do this. So he perverts the word. He knows the word, he perverts it. And so that's the same thing as us. After that, he got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. That's what he means. We belong to the Son, we can't have the new heaven and new earth. It's just like that, but we will not have to leave this.
Mhm.
We will not be able to give it away. And so that's what he's saying. Paul said, this is not our home. We're that's why we yearn for some. We're just travelers. And we're gonna get rid of this earthly tent and corruption is. And so that's what I see is God created a hole in our heart that only he can fill. We run on this planet the whole time, putting a square into a circle and everything else. It's a little while, it never really fits. It's never gonna fit because he's the one who can fill it. Not. I tried. And then I tried to give away, and God said, give away there. Can I give that? I tried.
Mhm.
And so I'm learning that play your position, find out why you're still here and do it. That's it.
Mhm.
No more, no less. You
Mhm.
can't do anything else, but like you said, learn and to co-create with him.
Mhm.
And that's all I see is play well. When he said I ran the race, play your part.
Mhm.
Then give none of us all of it.
Mhm.
So none of us say, I'm up here, you down here.
Mhm.
We all need each other. How can I say to hand, I need you, I need you. Your perspective, your relationship with God, same.
Mhm.
And today was a very interesting day for me. I was out of the hospital. And people called me. I don't know why I called you pray. After the call in the hospital. Oh, that's fine. Pray. Called the brother called me. I looked up, he's there. So there's two of y'all here? No, you gotta go. Kicked me out the hospital after they gave me the most a lot I've had since I've ever had it. As soon as I get outside with the wheelchair, she said, wait, you can't leave. You mean you got your life. I said, you pull the thing on my arm, you kick me out to me, I gotta go. As soon as I get outside, you tell me I can't leave. I said, how long? 2 or 3 hours. 2 or 3 hours. You pulled my thing. You said you got, so the open curtain, they gave me the wheelchair, my papers, everything, you gotta go. As soon as I got outside, I said, wait a minute, you can't leave.
Yeah, that's messed up.
What? God got the offer of that. That's how we know. But they